Jewish Insights with Justin Pines on JBS is made possible in part by the clubs at Pearl River, New York, luxury rental communities for ages 55 and better, now leasing Phase 3 at the Reserve, and the B.L. Manger Foundation.
הנה מה טוב ומה נעים שבת אחים גם יחד הנה מה טוב ומה נעים שבת אחים גם יחד הנה מה טוב ומה נעים שבת אחים גם יחד הנה מה טוב
Shalom and welcome to Jewish Insights. As I've said many times on this show before, the Jewish calendar is a cylinder. We come back to the same questions year after year. We explore those questions, and it seems like we always have new information to help us through the current moment. And this time, as we're coming together, it's to mark the holiday of Sukkot. Sukkot is a festival of joy. It's the happiest Jewish holiday, and I would argue that comes from three different things. One is joy through the idea of gratitude, from recognizing that what we have is not ours, and realizing that it's all gifts, whether you want to use the language of gifts from God or larger gifts, however language you're comfortable, but it's some sense of a gift and appreciating, and that's why we move outside, to go beyond, out into nature, away from our homes. The second is the connection to nature. You know, we spend so much time inside, especially these days, but taking a moment to be out in nature, to have the lulav and etrog, but to connect with the world around us. And the third is that it's a holiday that celebrates both particularism and universalism. Particularism in the sense that it is part of what we call the Shalosh Regalim, Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot. It's the third holiday of those, which mark specific moments in Jewish history, and universalism in that it is the third of the, let's call them Yamim Noraim, fall holidays, which is Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and then Sukkot, which are about fitting into the creation story, and Sukkot is the third of those. So we have this holiday that blends in both. So to review, it's the happiest holiday because it's a time of gratitude and humility, recognizing what we have and the joy that comes with that. Second, it's a time to connect with nature, which I think scientifically brings us joy, being around trees, being outside. And then third, it's a moment where we celebrate both the particularistic and universalistic aspects of Judaism. So to explore the holiday of Sukkot, I'm honored to welcome Rabbi Dr. Shmuly Yanklowitz. Rabbi Yanklowitz is president and dean of Valley Beit Midrash, a national Jewish pluralistic adult learning and leadership center. He's also the founder of Uri L'Tzedek, a Jewish social justice organization, Shamayim, a Jewish animal advocacy movement, and YATOM, the Jewish foster and adoption network, and I'm sure many more. Rabbi Yanklowitz is the author of 30 books on Jewish ethics, and he's been recognized by Newsweek as one of the top 50 rabbis in America, and by the Forward as one of the 50 most influential Jews. As we celebrate the holiday of Sukkot, I look forward to learning not only from Rabbi Yanklowitz's personal journey and leadership, but also his reflections on what Sukkot can teach us today about living meaningfully and ethically. Shmuly, I'm going to call you. That's okay?
That's wonderful.
We're old friends. It's great to see you. We both went to Chovah Beit Torah together back in the day, and it's been a while since we've been in person together, and I'm so thrilled to have you here.
Thank you, Rabbi Justin Pines. Huge fan of yours. Big fan of JBS, and really excited for this conversation. So thank you. I'm honored.
Amazing. So, I know you've been on Abby's show, which if people have not seen, go watch the interview with Abby. It's amazing.
Great. She is great.
I want you to just reintroduce for our audience that are finding you for the first time on this show. Just say a little bit about yourself and your, I know, very interesting journey.
Well, I grew up in an interfaith home. We moved every few years, Canada, New Jersey, Chicago, and continued moving. And I had a choice. And as a child, I had a choice between faiths and denominations, and I really affirmed this Jewish path. And then as a teenager, I went in really deep. I went in deep through universalism and particularism. The universalism was traveling in the global south as an educator, as a volunteer, and feeling connected to global poverty, just humanity, the earth, and looking for spiritual roots to connect with that more deeply. And particularistically, going to Israel for the first time. And my first deep experiences with Torah learning, which was actually Shmirat HaLashon, the guarding of the tongue with the Chafetz Chaim, and seeing just how much there is to learn. As a kid, I learned sticks and stones will break your bones. Then, little simple ideas. But I said, oh my gosh, the Chafetz Chaim wrote this whole sefer, this whole book on the ethics of speech. I want to be immersed into the depths of of spiritual life. And yet, at the same time, I was being pulled outwards. And so I said, can these two come together? Because I know particularistic Jews, I know universalistic Jews. Can I pull them together and live a life where I feel deeply a part of humanity, part of the human struggles, part of the American society, and also like immersed in a modern orthodoxy, immersed in a Jewish traditionalism, immersed in halakha, where I feel I'm in the details of Jewish life, and that's also guiding me. And so I live with multiple consciousnesses still in my life. And so that's the first 20 years of my journey.
Wow, beautiful. And I want to just pull out that because it's a really interesting, I'll call it chiddush in some ways, like a novelty, because I feel like, some of the narrative of, Jewish, let's call it social action, is that the word we're using these days? Sure. Right, I've noticed you say global south. I remember that was a new term that showed up also, right? It was third world and then it became the global south. So social action, is that the word? Great. So social action. A lot of that is like, check your Judaism at the door, water down your Judaism. Right. We're just about tikkun olam, aka social action, but it has nothing to do with this other stuff. Yeah. And then there's the people that are kind of like very much in the other stuff, and sometimes when you get very deep in Judaism, it's very easy to have like what we call the Dalet Amot, like four paces around you. You're only in your localized Jewish community, and they're amazing. This person had a baby, and this person needs help, and I'm going to take care of those people. But like, they're out there and we're in here. And I hear you saying, I'm going to try to do both. I'm going to try to be deeply focused on spirituality, Torah, traditional Judaism, and I'm going to be deeply focused on bringing that out into, let's call it the global south, or those in need.
That's exactly right. And I was so frustrated because I was in social action spaces that were about everything out there and nothing in here. It wasn't about midot, our character. It wasn't about our religious behaviors and sensitivities. Nothing against that. It was beautiful for them. They viewed themselves as righteous warriors to, address environmentalism, address poverty, address abuse, and people who are downtrodden. And then I was in the black hat world, and nothing against that world. I love that world. But they had no conversation about larger humanity. It was about this particular circle. And I said, is it possible to wed these two? Is it possible to imagine an identity? I don't forget even the world for myself. And I was reading Halachic Man at the time, and I was like, I grew up with a book on the back of my toilet called Don't Sweat the Small Stuff. Don't sweat the small stuff. And then I read Halachic Man, and I heard him saying, sweat the small stuff. It's all about the minutia. And I was pulled towards that. I want to attend to every emotion that's passing through my brain and heart. I want to attend to the minutia of religious life. And I also want to be able to zoom out. And I love the ability to zoom in and zoom out and see how those two relate to each other. And so that's the second chapter of my life, is trying to think about how to make Torah accessible in a way that is connected to meaningful action in the world.
Beautiful. All right, so give us, we're talking up here now. I mentioned a few of the organizations. Like my memories of you, you were 6 years ahead of me in yeshiva, so you were just kind of this person that I felt like, every week there was almost a new organization you were founding and a new book you were writing, and you're just like, they're the people that are busy, you are busy. I remember I was in an APAC conference with you once, and I remember you like taking multiple conference calls, responding to emails, running into the meeting. You're just like, you're a machine. Even now, you're here for a conference, you got off the plane from LaGuardia like a second ago, came straight here, we're doing this, you're jumping on. Like, talk to me about, I guess, first that drive, because that's separate. That's like a personality thing, I think, which is like the drive to like, to do so much. And then second of all, help me, like, bring me into how you think about what you're driving towards in terms of what you're setting up, in what order, which, is it like I focus on things that no one's focusing on? Is it like, how do you think about those questions?
So just a character comment before your question, which is that my avoda of the last 5 years, my spiritual work has been menuchas nefesh, to work on equanimity. So it used to be that racing around meant I was a ball of anxiety. Yes, I might get a lot done, but I'm just kind of an overflowing stress machine of being called in many directions. And thankfully, in these recent years, I've been able to do work to think about how are we in the noise and the mess externally, but have an intercom where when Moshe is approaching Paro, right, and they're screaming and there's noise and people spitting on him, you can probably imagine, and you're approaching the most powerful person in the world, and yet you can imagine Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, as having this intercom within him. as he's approaching this moment of turmoil. And I had a recent experience also with Reverend William Barber, who we were in this moment of civil disobedience, and he's about to get arrested, and he's walking with a cane, and he's sweating, and there's media, and there's police. And I look at this man, and he's moving, and it's noisy, and in his eyes, I see a total calm in him. And so a big part of that work has been how to stay in the messes, internally, mostly externally, and yet cultivate that focus and sense of purpose. And so the work for me feels like it's all over the place, but it really is centered. It is a God-centered approach, it is a Torah-rooted approach, and it's a human-centered approach. I feel called towards human dignity. I feel called towards kavod habriot. I feel called towards pikuach nefesh, saving life. I feel that I have so much privilege in my life. I was just given so many opportunities, and I feel a real responsibility and debt to try to do what I can to pay some of that forward. And so for me, it's mostly geared towards suffering. It's not some grand philosophy, political orientation. It's really that people are suffering, and I don't want them to suffer. Suffering can be generative. It's been generative for me. But it also can weaken the human spirit for most people. And so at YATOM, I want to support children who experience abuse and neglect, because few things keep me up more at night than that. Thinking of a child who just has no tools to make sense of what they're going through, and they need a safe home. So we try to find safe homes, foster families, or adoption, supporting Jewish families in their path towards, creating that. And we've been foster parents ourselves, and it's one of the most complex and rich experiences of my life.
Just before you go to the next one, I want to pause on that and just name it. I think literally this morning or yesterday, I got an email from you, to a group kind of saying, we're looking for a home for this child, and it's very powerful. And the thing that stands out to me forever is, I remember on Facebook once you posting a photo of, you were fostering, I guess, probably multiple children at the time, and you had a non-Jewish child being fostered in your home, and you dressing up as Santa Claus for Christmas. I just want to name that first of all, because I was just like, oh my God, that's amazing. If you want to say a word about that, say a word about that.
I got so slammed for that from a certain segment of the Jewish world. But, we had these Mexican brothers that were living with us, and they loved Christmas. And I love Christmas. I grew up in my earliest years with Christmas. And so I knew what they felt,
right?
Because someone else said, Christmas, what is that? Narishkeit, So, but I knew it. I knew what it meant to wake up and think there was this guy that came in the chimney and left your presents. And so I said, I don't know if this is going to work. But I told the boys, I'm going to just step out for a second. I got to do something. They didn't really notice. And I came through the front door in this costume. And the youngest one, sobbed hysterically, was so scared. But the older one, it was magical for him. It was magical. And he had no clue it was me. I couldn't believe it. And it was a magical moment for him. And, it's not a sacrifice for me to work in this child welfare space. It's such a spiritual high. Because when I see kids who, there's a success story, they get into a safe home, they get placed really well, or we just see outcomes that we couldn't have imagined for them, or someone with special needs and the family's just not equipped and they land somewhere great. I just think whatever tikkun olam is, repairing the world, has to be at the center of vulnerable children. And so, and this is Torah. Moshe is adopted, right? Esther is adopted or fostered, right? I mean, rabbis in the Talmud have a similar story. The Sfas Emes is an orphan. We have great leaders in our tradition who emerge from that brokenness and understand how to rebuild. So anyways, we could talk about that all day, but
I love that. Beautiful. And I interviewed Erica Brown for the new Rabbi Sachs Chumash. And of all the pieces of the Chumash to choose, they asked her to choose an excerpt, and it was the piece, his writing about Bat Paro, Pharaoh's daughter, and how she's such a hero that she chose to adopt Moshe in that moment, and what it must have been not to say save this child and hide them somewhere, but to be I'm taking this child, which is exactly the opposite of what her father was going for. I'm bringing him into the palace, and we're going to raise him here as one of our own. And that really drawing out for the readers of his Chumash, Rabbi Sachs' Chumash, that the heroism of what of what she did.
Yes,
So I think
yes.
we should, it goes back to the Bible, as you said, this idea of like fostering children and bringing them in and what it looks like. Amazing. Okay.
And just as a reminder, so the ger, the yatom, and the almanah are the three categories that Torah is obsessed with as the vulnerable people.
Translate them.
The widow, the stranger, and the vulnerable child. And I say vulnerable child, not orphan, because we call the organization YATOM, and we're not just dealing with orphans, we're dealing with a whole range of vulnerable children.
Right.
But, my wonderful wife and I have a great machloket, a great debate around showing the movie The Ten Commandments, and she allowed me to show that to our kids. But they can only view the daughter of Pharaoh now as her in the movie. And my wife might have been right that it was better to have an imagination than this picture of this actress. But the movie spoke to me as a young kid and continues to. And I think you're right. I mean, the power of her heroism to embrace, it gives someone a sense of power who then had this internalized power and was able to leverage that from a place of powerlessness to change the world forever. And it's not a mistake that Martin Luther King is drawing off the Exodus story. This is a story that has animated, and it's, as we'll get to Sukkot soon, has animated the world for so long, the power of revolution. Now, I'm not interested in political revolution. I'm interested in spiritual revolution.
Right.
So that moves to the next part of the work.
And I just want to name, we could spend the entire hour just talking about YATOM. And that's what's crazy about what's going to happen right now, because you're going to be like, here's this huge thing, and it's got 3 minutes of airtime. We're going to go to the next one now, which is crazy.
Okay, so Uri L'Tzedek was the first organization I founded, and it was founded to be what we talked about earlier, a vehicle of universalism for the most particularistic of Jews. So the Reform movement is known for social action, and they do a great job with that. And Orthodoxy was not embracing this universalism. I've been blessed with many great teachers who were activists in their own way, Rabbi Greenberg, Rabbi Avi Weiss, Rabbi Shlomo Riskin, and so forth. But I wanted to build an institution off of these messages. To the next level. And so we have a shower unit we have down at the border for people who haven't showered in months who are crossing the border. And we train the next generation of young modern Orthodox leaders to find their voice in the universalistic causes. This is more complex post-October 7th of how to cultivate allyship in a messy society around various issues. So that's the work of Uri L'Tzedek. And I partially feel very rooted in a modern orthodoxy for various reasons. And Uri L'Tzedek has been my vehicle to kind of expand that and build upon that.
Got it. And just to clarify, Uri L'Tzedek is, let's call it social action work that's well beyond the Jewish community, right?
Right.
And YATOM is what?
So the families are Jewish, we engage, but the children are almost mostly non-Jewish. We support many Jewish children. Right now I'm dealing with a case of placing a Jewish child. But that's a mix of both. Beautiful. Of both worlds.
Okay.
And then Valley Beit Midrash, where I've been for in my 13th bar mitzvah year now,
Mazal tov.
Has been just a delight of pluralistic adult learning. We've expanded from Phoenix to Denver and Salt Lake City and nationally with our Elie Wiesel Social Action Fellowship, where we are trying to create a model of how learning leads to action. Now, action, I mean lighting Shabbat candles, putting on tefillin, being more ethical in business, being more kind in home. Maybe it means, joining a protest of one form or another. Maybe it means you're left of center on Israel or right of center on Israel. We're not guiding people of what to stand for. We want to unleash the talent within people and believe that Torah has a wisdom that is relevant for the world. So that's VBM, and
Wait, just a question on that a little bit. I feel like there's two words you're using that I've always hard to crack, let's say. One is adult education and the other is pluralism.
Yes.
And I guess we could probably argue that our mutual teacher, Rabbi Greenberg, was the founder of both of those things in some ways.
Right.
Just say a little bit about that experience for you. When you think of adult education, what are you going for? And also when you think of pluralism, what are you going for?
Okay, great. So I know we both have a deep affection for Rav Yitz, and he has been a pioneering figure for me. And when I think of him as a founder, he leaves, I think, no institution behind. I guess he founded Klal. But I mean, it's not like he has this institution that he has built his whole life. Right. What he leaves is ideas. I think of him as the founder of Jewish pluralism. I think as the founder of Tselem Elokim, which makes no sense. It's in the Torah.
Which is so core to what you're saying.
Right?
Yeah.
He's the theologian of the image of God in humans, in a sense, and not to mention covenantal theology and so forth. And so my love for him is deep, and most deeply where we also share is in Musar, where he never abandoned his love for Jewish character development. But on pluralism, I think that he says the goal is that it's never relativism. The goal is that it's not absolutism, but that you don't abandon your absolutes. You just create more space for others' absolutes. It's not wishy-washy. It is a sense of humility that I can learn from everyone. Ben Zoma, in one of his 4 great teachings of Pirkei Avot 4.1, says the wise one is someone who learns from everyone. It's so profound. It's not who's mastered Shas, mastered the Talmud, not somebody with a PhD, nothing wrong with these things. It's not what you know in you, it's relational. It's how you relate to the other. So the pluralism I'm interested in is not that everything is equally true. It is a sense that the Hasidic side within me is that there are sparks of divinity in everything and everyone. And if that's true, I want to unleash it, I want to uncover it, I want to discover it. And so how do we do that? And so what we call pluralism just simply means to me that the complexity and depth of the world that the Ribono Shel Olam has given us, that God has gifted us to discover treasures in, should lead us into a life of being radically interested in everything, what we call in Musar, hitlamdut, that everything is a learning opportunity. Everywhere I look is a chance to uncover learning. Now, adult learning for me is a love of psychology and philosophy and history and of the learner themselves, and an ability to create a space where we can just bring our lives and our texts and the richness of the entirety of being into conversation with each other. And that's really my love. I mean, there's many things I do out of obligation, but my love is to be in learning spaces where we can just bring to life the power of ideas and the power of our souls. So the last organization I'll highlight for now is just Shamayim, because on the issue of suffering, I feel called to what I believe is quantitatively and qualitatively the greatest suffering on the planet, the suffering of non-human animals. And so we have a number of initiatives to try to build an awareness and consciousness of that type of suffering.
Beautiful. Let's talk about that a little bit. I remember when I was getting my klaf, I guess the thing you get when you graduate rabbinical school, that it's the equivalent of the rabbi diploma, let's call it, and then offering an option for a vegan version. And I remember you talking about vegan tefillin. Certainly at that time, I was nowhere near ready to be open to that. And I think now I've evolved more. I think Rabbi Yitz has moved in the direction of veganism a bit. We talked to Rabbi Sachs earlier. Rabbi Sachs, I remember being a vegan, and that's just what you're eating. But I think there's a larger question around that. Just bring me into that space. What do you I've seen you post I'll debate anyone in the world. I think there's a prize or something like that. Right.
Yes.
So just tell me a little bit.
Right.
Just talk me through that in a way. Why do you think there's so much pushback? What do you think is missing? What do you think the world is missing on that front? What progress have you made?
Thank you. So on the vegan cloth, it reminds me of a mistake I made where my smicha class, my rabbinic cohort that we were in together, I said we should all get the vegan one, and I wasn't vegan yet. And I offended one of my classmates who felt called to the more traditional one. He felt, and it was a reminder that one of the things that the broader vegan world sometimes gets wrong is kind of taking a gross approach or a shaming approach, a very intense or radical approach, and I feel like that's not mine. Mine is kind of a love-centered approach of people finding their own place within that world of trying to reduce suffering, as opposed to a judgmental one. Reaching back into Musar, the approach of flipping judgment into curiosity. How can people become more curious about ethical consumption in the world? Just for the record, I think Rav Yitz still identifies as pescatarian, although he certainly is a reductionist. He's definitely vegetarian, and he limits these other products. And I think we were just in conversation a few days ago around Shiluach HaKen and his appreciation for reducing egg intake. And Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, I believe, identified as vegetarian. He didn't identify so much as it, but it was important to him. But he didn't express it publicly so much, but it runs through his Torah as well, which I appreciated. Yes.
So I just want to pull out something there that really speaks to me, because I think there are certain things in life that I feel like I feel I'm in a certain place in them that a lot of society is not there. And I feel like I think where you're right, when I was younger, it was kind of like I need to convince everyone. This is right. I figured out what's right. Everyone needs to know what's right. And then I think that but I often wonder sometimes I also now fall short where I'm kind of like, I'm humble. I recognize that who am I to think I know anything? So I can make a choice for myself, but to impose that certainly on my home, let alone the larger world. I'll give an example. I at a certain point took a stand on football. I just felt like for me, it was a little bit the violence and the concussions was just I didn't want to be part of that in some way. And so I kind of took a step back. Certainly most of my social circles, Sundays is a big day, football is a big part of their lives. And then I remember someone approached me, we're going to start this campaign to get people to stop watching football. You should get involved. And I was kind of that's not where I am on that, and navigating that.
I love that.
So how do you balance being idiots? You should all be vegan, right? When you get to a point where you feel like this is emet, to use a Jewish term, this is the truth. This is where people need to be. Is the goal Rabbi Yitz talks about leading by 0.5% or something like that, because if you push too far, you lose the. So is it kind of we're going there eventually anyway. One day everything will be more animal sensitive, and we just have to bring the people there closely, and that's Messianic times. How do you think about that question?
Well, during this holiday period, I'm so glad you bring that up, because in thinking about the tshuva as it relates to Sukkot, I think that the self-righteousness that I've displayed throughout my life is so grossly embarrassing to me, as I was getting excited about moral ideals, the way I express those. Maybe in 10 years from now, I'll feel that about now as well, but I know I've made great strides in that. I think of a time where I blasted, I said publicly, I will not let my kids have a play date at a home that has a gun and a TV. A gun and a TV. Well, since then, I've considered getting a gun. I've decided not to get a gun, but I've considered getting a gun. I do have defense tools, given the reality of the world, and I have gotten a TV, and it's centrally used in experiences in my family. And I think back to that moment of judgment. So I think part of it is realizing how little we know and how much we're going to evolve. I think part of it is that it's just really ineffective, this preaching, and that the way to create change in the world, I feel like, starts not with doing, but with being. For us to just be the best we can be and allow that to impact. One of the crucial moments when I went vegan was I was with a rabbi in line ordering coffee, and he ordered it with soy milk before anybody knew what soy milk was. Almond milk, whatever he got. Soy milk? What is it? Oil? What's the problem? I said, and I hadn't been eating meat for years, but I even thought about it. And he said, let me tell you about what's going on in the dairy industry. And I can also order this just as easy. So he didn't preach it to me, he just reflected on what he was doing. And that was really a significant moment for me. And so for me, I feel that there is a place for screaming. There is a place for tocha and for protest, for rebuke and protest. But I've really moved away from that, because I have found the virtue signaling, as people call it, in the performative aspect, as it's often described, that there are so many ways to more directly create change. So to go back to our tools here, a lot of it, instead of hitting synagogues over the head, was how do we make it easy for you? So we give grants to synagogues, Synagogue Vegan Challenge. If you could just have a kiddush each month, we'll fund it to let people taste food they've never tasted before. Let them have a food justice education they've never had before. And then the debate is just kind of fun. We've offered, and I still offer to our audience today, if you have a rabbi, your synagogue has the chance, and likely will win, $5,000 if they beat me in a debate. And who are the voters? The rabbi's congregants. And what does the money go to? The synagogue's food budget. It's a winning experience. So the goal was, how do I get that debate into more institutions where we simply talk about our ethical food choices?
Beautiful. All right, last question, then I want to get to Sukkot.
Yeah, great.
Just to follow up on that. I love what you're saying, and it resonates so deeply. And I love how you also found like a happy medium, which is modeling and also like finding ways in a positive way to get into spaces to educate people. But I also want to name that in some ways, like in terms of the playbook that's out there in the broader world, it is the screamers who are getting the most attention, that are getting, a lot of, taking those extreme positions that are in some ways, not ideal. So how do you feel like, do you feel like you're giving something up when you like try to do it, let's call it the quote, there is no right way, I guess what we've discovered, but the quote unquote, the way that feels right to you when it's not like as like loud and screaming and self-righteous, because then you're not getting the level of attention you might get if you were doing it in an in-your-face way.
Yes, so I have decided that when we are not living clearly from our souls, that we will attract the wrong people to us. And if we lead in those ways, we will attract people that we don't necessarily want. And who do I not want? I don't want to be partnered with those who are not reflective and are in the extremes. And I think the extremes is where we're at today. And people think the world is scarier than it is. Because they think the far left and the far right, those loud voices and whatever we want to call the extremes of today, are representative of a lot more than it is. And if we go out in the world and talk with people more, we'll see that it's not representative. Right. And so the sne enenu ukal, the burning bush that is not consumed, who is the fundamentalist? The one that is so on fire they burn everyone around them. Who is the relativist who has no fire at all? The one who has the burning bush that has no fire. There's no burning at all. The burning bush that is not consumed represents how do we be on fire but not burn others, not burn out. And that's a place of moral passion where we're not just burning others to share our message. And so I think that we're in a crucial moment right now around figuring out how to live that prophetic space. In that space. And I think one of the crucial things to remember is the areas of our moral excellence, we should remember our areas of moral failure. I know people who are so proud of their cause. They think it's the number one cause, everyone should be on their cause, right? But that's not the world we live in. There's so many issues to care about. And one of the things that keeps me humble is thinking about how bad of an environmentalist I am. I care about the environment, I really do. And I believe in environmental science. But I have just not figured out a lifestyle. We have 2 minivans, we use disposables, I'm on the planes all the time. I use AI, which is, we're learning more and more what that does, for how much energy that requires. And I hold on to that because I say, just because I'm involved in foster kids and I'm involved in veganism, I'm involved in immigration and this stuff and that, there's a bunch of areas where like I'm failing on. And other people think it's the most important issue. And so, I think that moves me away from wanting to scream, because who am I to scream at someone who might be excelling in something I'm not?
Beautiful. I love that. Amazing. I want to turn us now for the rest of our time together. Get me ready for Sukkot. What do you got?
I am so ready for Sukkot. I love it. I love it. I also love it because I am not a manual labor guy, so I don't build my own sukkah. Some people love to do that. So I love it because it's pretty easy. I decorate, but Pesach is really hard in the home. Shavuot is notoriously the easiest. Right. But Sukkot doesn't. I'm fortunate to not have that laborious aspect because I'm a klutz. I'm not handy. But I love Sukkot for so many reasons. I love it, tapping into the 3 reasons you shared in the beginning. And I would add to that joy that you laid out as the first point, that the simcha of Sukkot, the joy of this holiday, in some ways is built off completing a process of teshuvah. Of course, we know it's not totally over yet. It's never over. Right. But this act of repentance, that those who don't train for a marathon, if they try to run a marathon, they're going to fail. So too, if we don't spiritually prepare for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we're going to fail. We have to spiritually prepare in Elul, in Slichot, in whatever ways we're going to prepare to embrace a marathon. And the way I view Sukkot, my father always laughed as a cross-country runner that I would end every race saying, I'm never doing that again. I would say it every time to him, I'm never doing that again.
But you're a cross-country runner?
Yes.
I didn't know that. Okay, cool.
It was transformative to my life, changed my life. You asked, were you a runner?
No, basketball and volleyball.
Okay, I was on the basketball team too.
All right.
I'm terrible at volleyball. But I was a runner, and I view the end of Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur as the end of a marathon. And I see the sukkah as that embrace after, where you get this little medal on your neck, someone hands you a banana and a water or a Gatorade, whatever it is, and then you take a breath. I view it as this sense of, I really worked hard to transform myself. And if not transform, be reflective of who I am without transforming. And I'm now in this cocoon of a safe space to zoom out instead of zooming in, because I just spent 10 days zooming in, and now I'm going to zoom out. And it is a cocoon. One of the Hasidic rabbis talks about the sukkah as a mother hug. It's a mother hug. Why? Because you have two walls and then a handbreadth more, and the two walls are the arms of the mother, and the handbreadth more is her hand reaching down, and the schach up top is her head, bent down over, holding us. The sukkah is this mother hug of the Shekhinah, of the divine presence that is holding us and loving us. And I think that Tikkun Olam in Sadia Goen's Sidur is a chaf instead of a kuf, which means to hold the world instead of repair the world. And I think what a lot of people need sometimes is not a repair, but being held. And Sukkot is a time to be held and hold each other after beating our chests, right? We can be hard on ourselves. It's okay to be hard on ourselves, not too hard, right? Right, as our teacher Rabbi Avi Weiss likes to share in the name of Rav Kook, that we don't just beat our chest, we then can recite a liturgy of loving ourselves. And from self-compassion flows compassion towards others. And so I view the sukkah embrace as an immersion in love. We can immerse in the mitzvah of living in Israel, that's immersing in the land. We can immerse in the mikvah, right, in the mitzvah of the spiritual bath. And we can immerse physically, like the land and like the waters, into the sukkah. Of course, the water is also a theme of Sukkot. That's another conversation. But that immersion is so powerful because so much of Jewish life is in the head and in the hands and in the mind and not in the body. And I love embodied Judaism because we are physical beings. I used to think therapy was the only approach to address inner turmoil. And and I found that what we need sometimes is to stretch in the sunlight, right? Because we are animals. And the sukkah is an embodied Jewish experience, right? I don't sleep in the sukkah. There was a time when I did, and I regret that I don't, although not the kind of regret where I wish to change it, but I just regret that I'm not the person who does that. But I want to spend time there. I want to spend time there for your second reason, your reason of nature. I feel that the embodied experience is not just of physically immersing in it, but it is going out of the home. And Degel Machan Ephraim says the gematria of Teva is the same gematria as Elohim, right?
Wait, let's just translate all that. So the Degel Machan Ephraim.
The numerology, the Degel Machan Ephraim is a teacher who I can't say much about at the moment.
Hasidic
take too long.
Yeah.
Hasidic teacher. And the numerology, the value of the Hebrew letters of Teva, of nature, is the same as the letters of one of the names of God. And Spinoza would love that because as a pantheist, nature is God, right? But if we embrace that as panentheist and not as pantheist, where God is everything in the world but also beyond it, what we can find is encountering the divine through nature, which I experience.
Sure.
I very much experience, and so that's another deep connection for me. But I think
Let's wait. Let me sit with that for a second.
Yeah,
Then go to the next one. First of all, I just want to hold that for a second. Pardon to use the pun of holding. But I love that idea. I think I remember kind of one of the metaphors that really stuck with me was Rabbi Michael Hatton at Pardes talking about how you go into the sukkah to have this sense of in theory you collected your whole harvest, right? And now you feel like you're a big shot, and then you go out into nature to recognize how fragile things are. You have a soft root that barely holds off. That sense of I'm hanging on by a thread here. Everything's a gift, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And you're adding, that feels like a moment of vulnerability. And I think you're saying, well, actually, in some ways, it's a moment of vulnerability, but it's a moment of vulnerability where you're being embraced, which I think is so beautiful, which is, you're going out into the sukkah to be hugged and to held. Right. I love that. It's beautiful.
Yes. So my pathway to God is gratitude. Rabbi Ibn Bakuda says, belief in God is not intellectual, proving this and that. It is that you have hakara tov, you're overwhelmed with a gratitude for life, and you need an address to express it. It's experiential and existential of emerging out of that gratitude. And that speaks to me. And I think stepping out of the home in that vulnerability can create a false vulnerability. Because I used to think it can lead us to address housing insecurity. There are people suffering, countless people suffering around the world and in America from homelessness. And we can mistakenly think that by going into the sukkah for a week that we get it. But why don't we get it, many of us? Because we bring our fine china out and we bring really nice meals out. And maybe, like me, we go and sleep on a mattress, or maybe we bring a mattress outside, right? And we know after the week we're going back inside, most of us, almost all of us. And we have lights, and we have nice meals, and the theme of Sukkot is not suffering, it's joy.
Right.
We're not there trying to cultivating an empathy for suffering in the Sukkah. We are there primarily to be joyous. So it doesn't work to get us there. And yet the Rambam says, he critiques Simchat Yontif, as we know it, the joy of the holiday. Because for most of us, what it means is good wine and good meat and a good meal and a good song and company, right? And he says, no, that's Simchat Kreso. That is the joy of the stomach. Simchas Yontif, the joy of the holiday in its deepest form, Maimonides says, is ensuring someone has a seat at the table, who needs a seat at the table, right? Who needs the food. And as we learn from other teachers, if you can't or don't want to have them at the table for whatever reason, then you send the food. There's ways to ensure people have their needs met. And I think that consciousness of ensuring people aren't left out, and that it's not just the joy of the stomach.
Wow, beautiful. I'm absorbing that as well as you say that. It's like a really important piece of it. And I think it aligns with some of the things you've been saying, obviously. And it's, we imagine the lavish sukkah experiences and like how to be more mindful of like the true joy, as you put it. I think that's really important. I do want to name, I know we're off of Sukkot, but you come back to Sukkot, that like when I think about the theme of kind of appreciating what you have, I know that you donated a kidney, which is also a totally crazy thing. Just say like, in some ways I assume that embodies the most like, here's what I have and I'm giving of it. Just say like a sentence on that for us as well.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. There was nothing selfless of this act. All I did was gain in this act because I never understood my body or the world or life in a way that I did from this experience. I feel like I was so enriched by this encounter. I met this young man, Israeli, whose mother died at a young age and who wasn't able to serve in the IDF and was on dialysis. And I met him, I was gonna give to anyone, this is just who they brought to me. And I met him right before the surgery and we hugged and cried. And I felt so deeply enriched by this experience. And my wife was the hero of it. I just laid in bed eating ice cream for like weeks, and she took care of everything. Right. And then he donated her kidney a year ago.
Really?
And unfortunately, a few weeks ago, had a complication. She's fine, going to be fine, but it's been a painful complication. And I share that because as I promote kidney donation, I also want people to know that it's hard. Right. I am not so pain tolerant. My wife is on the very tough side. I'm on the weaker side of pain tolerance. And so I'm transparent about that. But I always will talk with anyone. I want you listeners to know, I will talk with anyone who's considering doing it. As a coach, as a supporter. There's obviously no charge, no expectations. Yeah. I don't try to encourage people to do it. I just make myself accessible to be, and I also wrote a book on the topic, which is available on Amazon for like 10 or 15 bucks, that shares my journey and some of the science and some of the Torah behind kidney donation. So
beautiful. All right, sorry, it made me think of that. Let's bring us back to Sukkot. So you talked us through your vision of like what the Sukkah is. Keep going, what do you got?
Okay, so are we dealing with a concrete holiday or a spiritual holiday? This, of course, is the central theme in the Talmud in a debate of what does this represent? Ananei kavod. Anei kavod. Is this the cloud of glory, or is this Sukkot mamash? Or is this Sukkot mamash?
Right, and just so they understand, we understand. Ananei kavod would be like when we were traveling through the desert, it was the idea that like God's presence led us in a direction, versus no, actually, when we were in the desert, we had huts, and we're trying to evoke those huts. Okay.
And I think that, and by the way, it's already interesting that this holiday is in Tishrei, not in Nisan. That's a whole conversation itself. What do you mean? You leave Egypt, you're free, you start living in the desert, and you live in these huts. That's when the holiday should be, and that's a whole other conversation around physicality. Because I think part of what we see, the building of the Mishkan, is partially, I think, in some of the commentators, a response to Egel Zahav. That's to say the tabernacle is built as a place to serve God, as a response to the golden calf. Oh, you want physicality. You only know how to worship God through physicality. Okay, I didn't think that's what you needed. That's what you need. I'm going to give you something physical, a mishkan, a mikdash, and they're like, and maybe a sukkah too, right? That we need physical spaces, right, to connect. And so I think part of the brilliance of Judaism is the intertwining of the physical and the spiritual. And I love how physical, avodah b'gashmiut, service through the physicality. I love how physical Judaism is, right? We come off as superficial to some, but we're not anti-wealth, by and large. And we're not anti-physicality, right? The physical, I mean, the neshama yetera, the extra soul on Shabbat, how do you feed it? With food. Because we like to eat, we like food, and we like, right? And that's okay. And so I think that for me, Judaism, okay, I want to make a critique of two worlds that I love, liberal Judaism and traditional Judaism. One of the things I think traditional Judaism gets wrong is it says, what's the halacha? What's the halacha? The answer is the law. And one of the things I think liberal Judaism gets wrong is says, what's the value? What's the Jewish value? And I think those are both wrong. I think the most authentic Judaism I know is about dialectical tensions. It is about a Judaism that embraces conflicts, conflicting values and laws, and embraces the multiplicity of all that's involved. And so too here, I think that the answer is not being physical or being spiritual. It is constantly about the tension and the relationship between those two. And we see that in the sukkah itself. Because the sukkah is about the halachic physical dimensions of how you build this hut, right? And how you are to eat and live in this hut, right? Physically. And yet, it is about being able to see through the schach, to see outwards, like the law that every shul, every Beit Knesset needs a window to see outside. We need to see outside the sukkah, right, from within the sukkah. And this sukkah, by the way, is meant to house the entire Jewish people. It is meant, the Talmud says, to have all the Jews in there, the kinds you like, the kinds you don't like, right? Everybody in between, right? It is about that pluralism of building a hut that can contain all the ideas and all the personalities ultimately. And so that physical and spiritual tension ultimately really comes to life in how we experience joy. How we experience the joy as physical animals, how we experience the joy as angels and as souls that are on fire. And I think it's a chance to reroute ourselves in our priorities. There's a story of Rabbi Uri L'Tzedek, the Tzaddik of Yerushalayim. Why is he called the Tzaddik of Yerushalayim? Because he spent his time doing two things primarily. Serving people who are incarcerated, people in prisons, and sitting with people with dementia, seniors. And that sounds like a tzaddik to me. Wow. I spend very little time with either, and those two are two of the most neglected. People struggling, even their families often don't visit. Once they don't recognize them, and of course people who are prisoners. And the tzaddik of Yerushalayim was going to pick his etrog. And his students, like many students in the Haredi world, watch him so closely. Which etrog is he going to pick? Whatever it is. And he looked at one and very quickly looked at another, and within a minute was out. Picked the second one, and ran out and got back to his work. And his students, confronted him after him. So sorry, we don't want to question the Rebbe, but we really want to understand. We really want to understand what's going on here. Like, wow, what a beautiful mitzvah. To pick your etrog and you just rush out of it. It says the Torah has 2 mitzvot that talk about hidur, beautifying the mitzvah. One mitzvah is the etrog, that we on Sukkot we wave it. The other mitzvah is honoring the elderly and caring for the elderly. And if it says it's hidur, that you should beautify the mitzvah with a fruit, how much more so with a human being, with the elderly? And so for us to find the intertwining once again between Ben Adam L'Makom, Ben Adam L'Chavero, the mitzvot of ritualistic commands to connect to the divine, and the ethical, and to once again find that intertwining. And I think the way we awaken ourselves to that is itself by shaking the lulav and etrog. We know also from the Midrash that it represents the body, represents the spine, the heart, the eyes, the lips. What we're shaking is not just doing just doing a ritual, and that's powerful in itself. That Jews have shook this for millennia, right? But it is an inner awakening. It's an inner awakening to our potential.
Beautiful. Wow, I love that. You're pulling me in tangents here, but it's bringing me back to our vegan conversation, because I think like noticing that there's like a difference between the etrog and us as humans, and that like how much more so. Talk me through, just if you can. I know on one foot, I know it's also an hour conversation, but when you think about, I know we've had like an awakening in the past couple centuries that like children should be treated a certain way, different than we thought in the past. Right. So what is your philosophy in terms of thinking about, you mentioned Tselem Elokim, that humans are created in God's image. How do you think about animals? Is there an animal chain of some kind? Is there how do you think about that?
Okay, thank you for asking that.
You're pulling me everywhere now. I'm interested.
Yeah, thank you for asking that. So I depart from the animal liberation world and the animal rights world in my distinguishing between human dignity and human rights and animal rights. So I call it animal advocacy, because really it contains animal welfare, animal rights, and animal liberation. Animal liberation being the most radical, then animal rights, then animal welfare. And I do believe humans are created in the image of God, which, by the way, there's so many ways to read that. Who is God speaking to? Let us create humans in the image of God. Well, most commonly, talking to the angels, right? But another read is God is talking to the animals that have already been created. Let us create. But another read is God is speaking to the human being themselves, right? Because we are partners in self-creation, ultimately. So I do really believe that in an anthropocentric worldview, where humans are the pinnacle of creation, created in the image of God, and what Rabbi Soloveitchik calls with all the majesty and humility. And yet, I said, dialectical tensions. So I also believe in a non-anthropocentric worldview, an egalitarian worldview, where all is equal, all is godly, right? Who is to say this person matters more than that person, or that creature matters less? And so, there's this sikha of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. There's this vort he gives. There's a Torah he shares about how he davened through his shtender. And I think about it all the time, because I used to think Hinduism was narishka. It was just ridiculous, like multiple gods and praying through this and praying through that. And I went to India to try to understand it. And I came to love Hinduism with no interest of practicing, but I just came to love Hindus and Hinduism for various reasons. And the treatment of animals certainly being a part of it. But I started to see with the Lubavitcher Rebbe also this sense of serving through everything and through everyone. And so I think the best reason I've ever heard of the use of animal products for food and for tefillin, which I wear, and for Torahs and the like, is the idea of elevating an animal soul towards a higher purpose. Now, if everyone was doing it for that reason, I'd say, that's beautiful. But I think largely that's not what's motivating such consumption. And so for me, it is not about rights. It's not about the right of an animal. I don't think it's an agent in that regard that can hold legal rights and is a legal agent. For me, it is about suffering, once again. I just look at the eyes of a creature that's in a box and has never left the box and is stripped from its mother so at such a young age. And I know it has pain. And I know the Torah cares about pain and suffering. The Talmud has an exercise of looking at various mitzvot, trying to figure out which one makes Tsar Ba'alei Chayim D'Oraita, which one makes the prohibition of causing pain to animals of a biblical origin, because there's so many to look at. So that's kind of my short answer there, that my commitment to human dignity and human rights doesn't limit my desire to want to reduce suffering, even though I view animals on a lower plane.
Beautiful. Okay, final question. Yeah. We talked about the sukkah. We talked about the lulav and etrog beautifully. Another kind of, there's many highlights of Sukkot, but Kohelet is this, just give us a couple minutes on your take on Ecclesiastes, I guess called. A very interesting, provocative book.
So I'm not a scholar of Kohelet, but I did write a book on Sefer Mishlei, the book of Proverbs, and which, as a student of Musar, one of the practices of Musar is chanting, and I don't do it enough. I actually do it very rarely, but my stating it is my desire to do it more. And I think that if you're going to look somewhere for chants, I think I would start with the book of Proverbs, because its simplicity actually is where the complexity is found. And I quote that because Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, is traditionally attributed to have written 3 works: Proverbs, Mishlei, Ecclesiastes, Kohelet, and what's the third one?
Shir HaShirim.
Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs. And the debate around the order, some people think that a young, immature person just writes these proverbs, right? Okay, here's some moral truths. The person's screaming, protesting. Oh, do this and do that. It sounds like a scream. It sounds like an activist at times. Somebody slightly more mature writes a love song, and then in their maturity, they're now cynical. They're now cynical of Kohelet. They're just vanity. Like, I thought everything was important. It's actually not so important. But I think you can read it the opposite way as well, where cynicism, if you read it as cynicism, is kind of the lowest manifestation of the human spirit, where a real disillusionment, a real pessimism, you might say, that can be found there, is actually an illness that I think people in society are struggling with, where they can't find meaning in life. And so they conclude with one simple truth. And the conclusion there, and I think it's a beautiful conclusion, is it's just the service of God, right? And it's to be sure, Ahavat Hashem and Avodat Hashem are answers that resonate for me very deeply. But I do think that a simplicity of one mission runs the risk of dismissing a broader array of life. And so I view Kohelet as in dialogue with. Now, do I think King Solomon sat down and wrote these books? I'm not sure. But as a student of academic scholarship as well, I'm open to the idea that there's a range of editors involved in these works. Nonetheless, I attribute it to Shlomo HaMelech because our tradition has done that for a long time. And I'm sure he had a hand in these projects, at least. And so I like to view it through him, and I feel connected to him, King Solomon, in many ways. And I view that journey of his works in my own narrative of where am I in that journey. And I have struggled at times with the plague of disinterest, that life is about eat, drink, and be merry. Life is fundamentally about being happy. Life is fundamentally about me. And I think that is in the top 3 plagues of our time. That we've lost meaning. We feel depressed. We feel disconnected. We feel disillusioned. And I think Sukkot is there to read that work, to open that conversation.
Wow.
To open that conversation of the meaning of life. Of the meaning, or as Viktor Frankl said even better, the question is not what's the meaning of life, but what's the meaning of your life? To ask myself, okay, I just did Rosh Hashanah, I just did Yom Kippur, I'm going to dance with the Torah and Simchat Torah coming up. I'm now here in a slow, reflective, joyous space to dream to dream about the purpose of my life. And to say there is so much vanity out there. So Rav Kook says that sometimes the atheist might be closer to God than actually the false believer, right? Because sometimes you actually have to dismiss a whole lot in order to rebuild, to re-embrace. So maybe it's saying there, it's all vanity. Kohelet's right. It's all like, break it all down. It's all lies. It's all wrong. It's all an illusion. It's fake news. Now I'm going to rebuild. And what am I going to rebuild my faith in?
Wow, beautiful. Thank you for leading us with that. Such a treat to see you and to spend time with you. I feel so excited for Sukkot. Thank you.
I love what you're doing here and what you represent and the Torah you have in the world.
The feeling's mutual, and we'll hope to see you again soon.
Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach.
הנה מה טוב ומה נעים שבשחים גם יוחד הנה מה טוב ומה נעים שבשחים